Welcome to the Health Filter. This is where we break down wellness trends through the lens of human physiology and systems thinking so that we can better understand what's actually helping and sometimes what's hurting your health. One of the biggest problems in our modern wellness culture is that we've confused stimulation with adaptation. There's the assumption that if something feels hard or intense, exhausting, extreme, that it inherently must be effective. But physiologically, the body does not adapt simply because a stress is applied. Adaptation's actually a very resource-dependent process. And what that means is your body's ability to respond positively to stress depends on whether it has enough energy, enough recovery capacity, hormonal support, nervous system regulation, tissue resilience in order to actually absorb that stressor. And this becomes incredibly important in midlife, where many women are unknowingly operating with a much narrower recovery margin than they did maybe a couple years ago, a decade ago. So today, I want to break down the difference between pushing the body and supporting the body. So when we look at a machine, it will respond predictively to an input. That's its job. Human physiology, however, doesn't. The body's an adaptive system, which means that outcomes are context dependent. So the same workout can create completely different physiological responses depending on things like your sleep quality, your nutrient availability, your hormonal state, your psychological stress, your nervous system load, the inflammatory burden, your recovery history, and even things like your perceived sense of safety. And this is one of the biggest limitations of a lot of modern wellness advice. It isolates interventions from context. So it's asking things like, is this a good workout? Is fasting good? Is cold plunging good? And instead it should be asking, under what conditions does this stress become adaptive versus depleting? Because the body is constantly interpreting context, not just the intervention itself. And exercise in and of itself is not inherently beneficial. It is a stressor. The benefit comes from the body's response after the stressor. And that distinction matters. Adaptation generally follows the sequence of we apply a stress, we apply a disruption, then there's a recovery period. And in that recovery period, we have repair and rebuilding that occurs, and then that increases the capacity of the system. So we have this cycle, and without adequate recovery, the body never fully completes that adaptation cycle, which means many people are living in this repeated stress, repeated disruption without meaningful rebuilding. And this is where wellness culture can become really misleading because it often glorifies the stress response itself. It glorifies like, how sweaty did that workout make me? How sore was I afterwards? How exhausted, did I feel at the end of it? Did the instructor push me harder? Did they get me to do more than I could have? And the important thing here is more stress does not linearly equal more results. At a certain point, stress stops being productive and it starts becoming just noise that the system can no longer organize effectively. So the question is not, did I stress the system. The question is, did the system actually have the capacity to adapt to that stress? And in midlife, many women notice that the strategies that used to work just suddenly stop working. Their cardio workouts, their HIIT workouts, the restriction that they felt they needed, maybe that was in the form of fasting. This gets interpreted as, okay, they're not working, so therefore I just need more discipline. But physiologically, there's real shifts occurring. Your hormones are changing. Estrogen, it will influence things like your muscle recovery, your glucose regulation, the integrity of your connective tissue, the resilience of your nervous system in general. Then we have things like sleep disruption happening, which is changing that recovery signaling. Oftentimes there's chronic underfueling that's happening, and this is becoming a bigger and bigger physiological expense. And then you layer on things like caregiving and running around errands, work stress, the emotional load of it all, often under chronic inflammation in the system and lack of downtime in general, time for self, and this overstimulated nervous system. And so your body is constantly tracking this cumulative demand. Okay, so it's not just the exercise demand, it's the total demand that it's tracking. Okay, this is called your allostatic load. This means it's the total physiological burden that your system is carrying. Okay, your body does not separate these stressors into categories, good, bad. Everything's integrated. So if someone's under-recovered, under-fueled, constantly stressed, sleeping poorly, and then layering on this excessive training stress, the body may just stop interpreting that exercise as growth-promoting stress and start interpreting it as just like a survival stress, okay? And when we look at pushing is often characterized by overriding the feedback from the body in pursuit of an ultimate outcome. So we're pushing because we're chasing a certain amount of calorie burn, or we're pushing to complete that high intensity work because we feel like we should. We're pushing to a point of exhaustion because that's where we feel we need to go. And we're ignoring things like our recovery markers. We're glorifying soreness. We're under eating or overtraining. And then there's this feeling of guilt for actually hitting pause, actually resting. And physiologically, this can create a state where the nervous system becomes increasingly protective. So it's guarding. And so you might be feeling things like just more tension, or you might actually feel like your body's bracing. Your recovery metrics are declining. Your sleep quality, it's very disruptive. You might have a plateau in your workouts, in your progress. You might be feeling increased inflammation, a lack of availability of different movements, and you just have this chronic, persistent fatigue. Okay, and the body will start to prioritize immediate survival over this long-term adaptation. Then we look at supporting. Supporting the body is very different. Supporting doesn't mean avoiding the challenge. It means creating the conditions that allow the challenge to actually become adaptive. And this includes things like progressive overload strength training, so gradually building up that challenge, adequate protein intake, adequate fueling, and then giving yourself those recovery windows, having down weeks, having peak weeks, and then recovery weeks, giving yourself the time to sleep, building in things like mobility and tissue variability into your programming, having tools for nervous system regulation, and having your intensity intelligently distributed throughout your program. Okay, and support leads to increased capacity, and that increased capacity changes how the body tolerates and adapts to stress. Resilience isn't built by endlessly accumulating stress. Resilience is built through successful adaptation cycles. A lot of wellness messaging is built around stimulation. Okay, that first stressor, the harder, the colder, the faster, the longer, the more disciplined, the more extreme. But stimulation and healing are not synonymous. And this is where many people become trapped in this cycle of constantly trying to optimize themselves, all while becoming increasingly dysregulated. And a dysregulated nervous system can still appear highly functional, especially in like high-performing women. But health is not simply the capacity to tolerate stress. Health is the capacity to recover, adapt, and maintain flexibility in the face of stress. The goal isn't to remove the challenge from life. The goal is to increase the system's ability to adapt to challenge without breaking down. And that requires shifting away from constantly asking, how hard can I push myself, towards asking things like, what creates a sustainable adaptation? Because supporting the body is not soft, it's strategic physiology. And it's this kind of systems-based approach to health and human physiology. If that resonates with you, subscribe to the channel, because this is where I'll be sharing more conversations around systems thinking, around movement, around recovery, around hormones, nervous system health, and the physiology behind wellness trends. Because I want you to be able to understand your body so that you can make more empowered choices for your health.